CFD Securities, a stockbroking firm on the Gold Coast in Queensland, Australia. And every Monday morning I go through what happened globally around the world and try to forecast what we may see this coming week. I'll show you how investors and traders can make money on our stock market and the global market. I'll show you what is hot, what is not, and what you should hold and what you should fold. And by the way, if you enjoyed the presentation, please give us some feedback. We start always and see what happened in overseas markets. You can see here that the American market, that is the stock market, was up over the last 2 weeks. We can see that the Dow was up 2.4% over 2 weeks, and most of it came evenly between the 2 weeks. The Nasdaq Technology Index was up 1.8%, and so is the S&P broader index, the 500, up 1.8% over the last 2 weeks. As a matter of interest, actually the American markets for the last 4 weeks has been going up and reaching an all-time high. When you look at the US dollar, over the last 2 weeks was up 0.9%, despite it was almost steady last week. The Australian dollar was down by 1.4% over the last 2 weeks. Half of that loss came last week. In terms of the sterling over the last 2 weeks was down 2.3% and steady last week. Looking at commodities, gold was down $48 over the last 2 weeks, and last week a rise of $9 did not really help at all. So we are down 3.2% over the last 2 weeks, and the market closed on Saturday morning at 1,469 US per ounce. Silver had a major drop of 6.5% over the last 2 weeks, not helped by the 1% rise last week. Light crude oil, that's the West Texas crude oil, was up 3% over the last 2 weeks. And by the way, if you're interested to find out more about the other commodities such as soybeans, coffee, etc., all you have to do is talk to us and we can help you to trade these commodities in CFD format. Looking at the local market, you can see that all our indices were positive over the last 2 weeks, and you can see that the energy was one of the best sector. Information technology was up 9.3% over 2 weeks, very strong last week by nearly 6%. And on the negative side, we can see that gold, well, obviously we mentioned that Newcrest mine was down and gold was down. So you can see that our sector, gold sector, was down by 5.4%, more than the drop in actual physical gold price. Our stock market gauge, the ASX 200, is made up to a greater extent by two major sectors, the financials and the materials. When both of those sectors are up or down, the market usually, most of the time, react accordingly. If you look at the financials over the last 2 weeks, it was down by 0.4%. However, the materials were up by 2.9%, and that puts some more impetus onto the ASX 200. Our market was up by nearly 2% over the last 2 weeks. Half of it was risen last week by 1%. Okay, in terms of our stocks, if you look at the last 2 weeks, we're going down the ranking here. Wesfarmers was up 5%, AMP was up nearly 9% over the last 2 weeks. Most of it happened to be across the last 2 weeks, 4% last week and 8.6% over 2 weeks. BHP, even though it was slightly down last week, it had a rise of 4.4% over the last 2 weeks. CBA, 3.1%. Macquarie Bank, 2.7% over the last 2 weeks. And as I mentioned, Wesfarmers, Worley, Woolworths and WPL were all up over the last 2 weeks. We like to look at the last 2 weeks and compare it with what happened last week to see if a trend continues over 2 weeks instead of just having 1 week up and 1 week down. In terms of volume, we believe volume is a very strong leading indicator, and you can see here week on week over the last 2 weeks we've had the last 2 weeks the advances increased above the declines. Looking at the daily chart here, the volume was reasonable over the last 2 weeks, around the 2 billion transactions per day, and on Thursday and Friday we've seen that the advances were actually exceeding the declines, as you can see here. Again, that also tells us a bit more about the volume, which is a leading indicator, and what's happening to the market in general. We have designed a mechanical system, and over the last 20 years that mechanical system with 70% probability of accuracy, it tells us what's happening in the market in terms of trend. And we have various strategies for different type of investors and traders, as you can see here. So looking at the American market, if you trade in the American market, the investor as well as the traders, we've had very strong week on week, very strong bullish trend. In terms of gold, we've actually been telling you for the last 4 weeks that gold was actually starting to actually weaken from bull, bear, bear for the last 2 weeks. Silver, the same thing. We've had strong bearish indicators for the aggressive trader and the very aggressive trader. Crude oil, we've gone from neutral to slightly bullish. And again, for the other commodities, you can also talk to us and we'll tell you what you should be trading. In terms of our Australian dollar, we had a very strong bullish trend over 2 weeks. That's 4 and 3 weeks ago. And then the last 2 weeks we turned into neutral, into bearish. That is a time where if you were making some money in the neutral position, you should take some profit out. And the gold and also the British pound versus the US last week was very strong trend. Looking at the chart for the Dow Jones, you can see here on the weekly chart for the last 6 weeks we had a very strong bullish trend reaching an all-time high. On the daily chart you can see almost for the last 2 weeks, day after day, with the exception of one day amongst those 10 or 11 days of green candles. So there is no doubt that the market in America is very, very strong. Look at our market, again, with the exception of the financial and gold, most of our sectors last week were very strongly bullish. As you can see here, the All Ordinary, the top 300, the ASX 50, the Mid Cap 50, industrial, consumer staples, all bullish. So we have a strongly bullish market, and I wonder if this week we're likely to reach the all-time high that we've seen about a month or two ago. This is actually our weekly chart. You can see about sometimes about maybe 3 or 4 months ago we reached an all-time high and we didn't hang in there. Now we're likely to reach it this week. Well, that would be a good question. I mean, you can see that for the last several weeks, with the exception 3 weeks ago, we've had a red candle, but every other candle was actually green. Now look at the daily chart. We finished very strongly on Friday. Almost at the end of the week, we ended up on the day on Friday at almost at the highest level. Are we likely to continue to see that? Well, the futures are showing that the market is likely to open very flat today, but I wouldn't be surprised that during the week we might see an increase in our market. So it's not a good time to go bearish on the market. Of course, you know, you've got to really have look at every stock differently even though the overall market may be going up this week, there are some companies that may not do as well. Looking at our market here, we've got the weekly on the left hand side and what we've predicted day after day on the right hand side. Well, we finished with ANZ to be bearish, and every day last week we've actually been saying that it's likely to end up bearish. And the same thing with the bullish on BHP and CBA, and we actually that's on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday and Friday. We've been looking at the forecast as being bullish, and at the end of the week we ended up very strongly bullish for the aggressive trader and the very aggressive trader. Macquarie Bank, the same situation, very strongly bullish for Macquarie Bank, and Wesfarmers and Woolworths again very strongly bullish, and so is TPG. And you can see here the market, the XJO, bullish across all investors and traders. And we can see here what we have been predicting right through the week. This is actually what we see at the end of the week. That's the weekly prediction. And what you see on the right hand side, the daily prediction right through from Tuesday to Friday. We like to look at volume, and week on week we can see here that Sydney Airport, well, I think those numbers are not really correct. We have to really go back and check it. But anyway, we don't see very strong volume happening for Sydney Airport. But looking at the mid-cap, we've got 200% on lifestyle communities. We don't know a great deal about this company. We need to go and find out more about it. LSA, that's a gold trading company, had 144%. Cedar Woods, 114% above the weekly average volume. On the downside, Jupiter Mines, it appeared several times last week, and we finished over the week with 160% above its average volume. Bigger Cheese, 144% above its average volume, with a down trend for that particular stock. Now, what happened on Friday and Saturday? You can see here the Dow on Friday finished 222 points higher, 0.8%. That's a very strong finish of the week. And so is the S&P 500 and the Nasdaq, very strong end of the week. Gold on Saturday fell $5 to $1,468, and silver was down 8 cents to $16.95. And the Australian dollar finished at $68.17. In terms of Bitcoin week on week, you can see that Bitcoin on Saturday finished $116 down and finished at 8,652, and that converts to approximately 12,527 Australian dollars, down 265 Australian dollars. Now, in terms of our CFD trading, we've showed you this last week, and at one stage we were actually up 81.8%, then we were down 65%, and then we were up 80%, and again trading the British pound, Appen and ASX 200. And on Monday last week we were actually up to nearly 9% in profit, and down again further to 85%. And this morning, unfortunately, we didn't have a good week last week. Our profit dropped to 59.1%. Yes, that's a good profit. However, after getting to as high as 90% profit, that's of course a major decline in the profit. But we are still in profit. We're still making $2,365 over our capital of $4,000. And these are our open position. At the moment we have Orica, we have 500 CFD trading, and we are breaking even. Karoon, we've got 1,500 CFDs, and we're almost breaking even. We trade Grain Corp last week, and we were actually sitting on $200 profit. And of course, if the market continues to go high for Grain Corp, we have a target of $250 profit, and we will take it and run. Appen has been a bad trade for us last week. At the moment we're losing $514, and that is actually the major decline in our profit due to Appen. Finally, everything we said today is of general advice only, and before you take any action, please contact us and communicate with your professional advisor. Otherwise, we don't know your financial circumstances, so be cautious. No guarantee that everything we said is going to happen. Every trade has got risk and reward. If you have any questions, all you have to do is ask us. Write to me, george@fssecurities.com.au, and if you're ringing from overseas, you put 61 for the Australian code. You don't need the 0, so it becomes 61-411-259526. I'm available almost 11-12 hours a day, 7 days a week. So finally, happy trading, and I hope whatever you do turns into gold.